Hello, and welcome to This Explainer. I want to kick things off by asking you a pretty massive question. Can a nation truly be the master of its own economic destiny? We constantly hear politicians and central bankers promising to steer the economy toward endless prosperity. But when we actually look under the hood of international macroeconomics, we find out that the laws of economic physics might just have other plans. Today, we're stepping into our very own policy laboratory to test the absolute limits of government power in an open economy. To do this, we'll be using one of the most elegant and powerful frameworks ever devised. It's called the Mundell Fleming model, and as you'll see, it ultimately leads us to a fascinating and honestly inescapable paradox known as the policy trilemma. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the Mundell Fleming model, then look at floating exchange rates, move on to fixed exchange rates, and wrap up with the policy trilemma. Part 1, the Mundell Fleming model. Okay, let's lay down the groundwork for our open economy machine. To really understand how countries interact on a global scale, we first need to know what happens when borders are completely open to money. The essential fluid powering our economic machine here is something called perfect capital mobility. Imagine a world where investors can move literally billions of dollars across the globe at the click of a button. If one country's interest rate rises even a tiny fraction of a percent above the rest of the world, boom, a massive tidal wave of foreign money rushes in to capture that higher return. As we're going to see, this extreme sensitivity to interest rates completely changes the rules of the game for policymakers. Our framework establishes a really neat baseline equilibrium. This is the Mundell Fleming model in action. The downward-sloping IS curve represents the goods market, so things like investment, consumption, and net exports. And that vertical LM curve, that represents the money market, which is anchored firmly by the world interest rate we just talked about. Where these two curves cross is our economic sweet spot. It's the exact exchange rate and level of income where everything perfectly balances out. But what exactly happens when we disturb this piece? Let's find out. Section 2. Floating exchange rates. Let's run our first lab test. We're going to observe what happens when a government tries to boost its economy in an environment where the value of its currency floats freely against others, adjusting automatically to market supply and demand, much like the US dollar does today. Suppose the government tries to stimulate the economy by spending a massive amount of money or cutting taxes. You'd probably think pulling this fiscal lever would boost overall income, right? Well, when the IS curve shifts to the right, it tries to push domestic interest rates up, but instantly foreign capital floods in to grab those higher yields. To actually invest, foreigners have to buy the local currency, which drives the exchange rate way up. This stronger currency then makes the country's exports incredibly expensive and imports super cheap. The end result? Net exports plummet, completely neutralizing the government spending. Income stays exactly the same. It's wild, but fiscal policy here is totally powerless. But watch what happens when we pull a completely different lever. If the central bank expands the money supply, the LM curve shifts to the right. This pushes the domestic interest rate slightly below the world level. Suddenly, capital actually flees the country seeking better returns abroad. As investors dump the local currency, the exchange rate drops. It depreciates. Now, domestic goods are dirt cheap for the rest of the world. Exports absolutely boom, imports fall, and overall income actually expands. Under floating rates, monetary policy works brilliantly. Section 3. Fixed exchange rates. Now, we're going to completely change the environment of our machine. We're locking the exchange rate in place. The central bank is now legally obligated to buy or sell as much currency as necessary to keep the exchange rate strictly fixed. Brace yourself because there's a massive surprise coming. Let's try that exact same monetary expansion again, but this time under fixed rates. The central bank tries to print money, shifting the LM curve right. Again, interest rates dip and capital starts to flee. But wait, to prevent the currency from losing value and breaking that fixed rate, the central bank has to aggressively intervene. It must sell foreign reserves and buy up its own domestic money. This shrinks the money supply right back to where it started. The LM curve is violently forced back to its initial position. Under fixed rates, trying to run an independent monetary policy is completely useless. So the absolutely crucial point here is that macroeconomic laws literally flip upside down depending on your exchange rate regime. If your currency floats, the central bank has all the power to boost output, while government fiscal spending does practically nothing. But if your currency is fixed, the central bank is totally handcuffed, and it's government fiscal spending that successfully drives up output. They yield perfectly opposite macroeconomic outcomes. It's a total mirror image. Section 4. The policy trilemma. Time for our grand finale. We've seen how the mechanics of these policies work on the ground, but when we zoom out, we discover an inescapable law of physics that governs absolutely all open economies on the global stage. It all builds into what economists call the impossible trinity, or the policy trilemma. This highlights a really painful reality. Policymakers have three ultimate macroeconomic superpowers they desire. They want a fixed exchange rate for trade stability, they want unrestricted financial flows to attract global investment, and they want monetary policy autonomy to manage their own inflation and unemployment. But here is the agonizing catch. They can only ever possess two of these three superpowers at once. If you try to grab all three, the entire system inevitably breaks. Let's actually compare these real-world trade-offs directly. Most modern, large economies, like the US, choose a floating rate regime. They really want the freedom to set their own interest rates and allow free-flowing global capital. But to get that, they just have to accept that their exchange rate will bounce around every single day. Alternatively, if a country chooses a fixed rate regime, like being on the historical gold standard or tying their currency strictly to a neighbor's, they get wonderful trade stability and open capital markets, but they entirely surrender their ability to use monetary policy to fight domestic recessions. It's a huge trade-off. So, we arrive right back where we started. Can a government truly control its own economy? Well, only partially, and only if they're willing to make a massive sacrifice. To get something, you have to give something up. So I'll leave you with this final thought. If you were suddenly appointed as the supreme central banker of a nation, looking at the Mundell Fleming model and the brutal reality of the impossible trinity, which two macroeconomic superpowers would you choose? Thank you so much for exploring the mechanics of the global economy with me in this explainer today. Keep asking those big questions and keep learning.